Hello everyone and welcome back to another book review. Today I am going to be reviewing The Tusks of Extinction by Ray Nayler. This is what the cover looks like. It's a very short book. I'm not even sure it would be a novel. It's probably more of a novella style. And I was intrigued and was inspired to take this book home from the library because I saw that it was marked at my library as science fiction, but it had these mammoth tusks on the cover. So I wanted to figure out those two juxtapositions of an older, maybe ancient creature and this science fiction label. Took it home, read it, and I'm going to be reviewing this today. I'm going to be talking about the plot as well as what I enjoyed in this book and some other thoughts and questions that I think this book brings up. So let's dive in and talk about The Tusks of Extinction. So as already mentioned, this is a short book. It's under 100 pages, I believe, or just coming in at 101 with the acknowledgments. So it's quite short, and it's a short sci-fi story because it's really exploring one singular thought experiment or concept. The author is really just playing with this idea, and there are a couple surrounding related questions to the idea of if we were to bring back, say, woolly mammoths using DNA technology and incubating in elephants, how would we teach these mammoths to act in a certain way? How would we teach these mammoths to have self-preservation instinct and conduct themselves accordingly to be released in the wild and not just be creatures in zoos? The author sets this in a futuristic world where elephants have been killed off. And actually throughout the book, there are two timelines, although one timeline is dropped about halfway through the book and we focus entirely on the present timeline. So we have timeline one, which is following primarily a woman named Demira. I'm going to say Demira. I'm hoping I'm saying that correctly, who is a woman who is dedicated to protecting the remaining elephants in Africa. Ivory fetches a huge price, although that's true today, but in this world it seemed to be even higher, and it's quite a bit more pressing that poachers are kept away from elephants. The elephants are kind of losing the war, but we have women like Demira and a whole slew of other characters who are trying to protect elephants from being driven to extinction. So Demira has had the opportunity to protect these elephants. She's very passionate about it, but she can kind of see the writing on the wall that this is a war that they aren't winning, and there's quite a bit of violence enacted by poachers against people like Demira who are protecting elephants. Then there is what I would consider the present timeline, which is about 100 years later, where mammoths have been brought back to life, and Demira has been tasked with leading these mammoths in the wild to teach them how to be mammoths again. In this other timeline, elephants have been driven to near extinction. They solely exist in domesticity. Am I saying that word correctly? They're just under the care of caretakers almost exclusively, and they have lost all of their ability to function in the wild. So the mammoth's closest living relative, the elephants, are also not acting as elephants, and we don't have any way for the mammoths to be put in a natural elephant herd to learn. The mammoths are going to have to learn through some other way, and Demira has been tasked with training these mammoths. Now you think, how is Demira going to communicate with these mammoths? That's where the science fiction element comes in. In the previous timeline, the one that's 100 years in the past, Demira had her consciousness downloaded as part of this Russian project. She is herself Russian. Project in which the brightest minds in the world are kind of downloaded. Seems to be rather new technology. They're downloaded and they're stored so that if these minds need to be resurrected. Imagine if we could bring people like Gauss back to today's world and see what he could do with all of our knowledge. I think that's the idea, preserving people who have great mental ability or talent or skill so that when they die, if need be, we can take their backup copy consciousness and put it into a body in order to continue maybe work they were doing in a different time. Demira was downloaded as a consciousness, but she continued her life, and there was no thought put into this until mammoths were brought back after elephants have already lost all of their natural ability as well. And so Demira becomes, her consciousness, which has been downloaded, becomes this one singular way in which they can take her consciousness and, of all things, put her in a mammoth body and have her as a mammoth, using her knowledge of elephants, try to teach the other mammoths that are being housed in this big steppe area in Siberia how to be mammoths. Fantastical, I know, but it is science fiction, and it's more of this thought experiment of how we would reintroduce mammoths to the world. There's also a whole slew of individuals who in the present time are hunting these mammoths. There are two groups. One is a young boy who accompanies illegal poachers, so those who are trying to get to the mammoths because all the elephants are out of the wild. Now mammoths and mammoth ivory becomes very valuable, so he is with this poaching group trying to get to the mammoth's ivory, and by that they also mean get at Demira because she's now a mammoth. And we also have a legal hunt which is occurring, which is kind of kept on the low. It's not really public knowledge, but trophy hunters can pay exorbitant sums to hunt mammoths and have this unique experience of shooting an animal, which basically no one else would be allowed to do. So with all of that, we have Demira leading this mammoth group while people are trying to basically kill them, and the thought experiment plays out throughout this book. So overall, this book was short, but I think that was okay. The author was just trying to play with this idea and kind of created this fantastical science fiction setting to pull it from, or to play this situation out in. I will say that if you're not on board with the science fiction setting, if you want to see what this would look like from an actual scientific standpoint based on what we could currently do, there is a book, and the author mentioned it in the inspiration section in his acknowledgments, called like How to Clone a Mammoth by I'm forgetting the author, where it's more of a scientific take at the same problem without the science fiction elements. I actually read that book, but it is not marked as read on my Goodreads page, but I know I read that book or one very similar to it back in 2019 or 2020. So even though it's not marked on Goodreads, I had read that book, and when I started reading this book, I immediately thought that the author may have taken inspiration from that How to Clone a Mammoth book. And I will say there may be some people who pick this book up who maybe don't care about the science fiction element, or that's not why they're here. They want a more scientific rendering of this problem, and that's where other books that exist could fill that gap. So I definitely think there's a subset of people who picked up this book who maybe thought it was something that it wasn't, and therefore may be more drawn to the nonfiction books in this same category. I think the plot is also predictable as the story goes along. You understand that Demira's history with poachers are going to influence how she deals with and interacts with people who are encroaching on her now mammoth territory. For example, both the illegal poachers but also the legal hunters. How is a mammoth to know who the person that is shooting them is legal or illegal? Like how are the mammoths to distinguish that? And then to Demira, to someone whose life is physically at risk or whose herd's life is physically at risk, is there a difference? And there's that kind of thought is going throughout the undertone of the entire book, that what really is the difference between this very wealthy man who's paid a legal fee, which is going right back into the money's going right back into conservation efforts for the once in a lifetime opportunity to hunt a mammoth, any different from individuals who are trying to scrape by to survive, who are also killing mammoths and creating mass environmental destruction for their own financial gain. That all plays out in almost is subtext the right word, or am I getting ideas above my station because I don't understand literature at all? I do feel like that question is kind of percolating. I'm going to stop using words I don't know how to pronounce. It's throughout the entire text, I definitely find. And it was a very interesting question to think about as you switch between all of these perspectives, Demira's, the poachers, and the illegal hunting party throughout the entire book. I also thought when reading this book that not only was the book interesting, the author is interesting. So let me just read this section from the author flap because I really want to know if the author has published a memoir or an autobiography, because I feel like this man has some stories. Listen to this. Born in Quebec and raised in California, Nayler lived and worked abroad for 2 decades in Russia, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kazakhstan, Kyrgyzstan, Afghanistan, Azerbaijan, Vietnam, and Kosovo. A Russian speaker, he has also learned Turkmen, Albanian, Azerbaijani, and Vietnamese. He is currently a visiting scholar at the Institute of International Science and Technology Policy at the George Washington University's Elliott School of International Affairs. He holds an MA in Global Diplomacy from the Center of International Studies and Diplomacy at SOAS University of London. I just feel like this man has a lot of interesting stories and probably a lot of other interesting thought experiments going around in his head. It does say in the back that he seems to have published a number of short stories in a wide variety of what appear to be, I'm guessing, magazines like Clark's World and Analog Science Fiction and Fact. So he does have other works, and I would definitely check them out because I like the way that he structured and dealt with a lot of questions in the Tusks of Extinction. It is a little short, and of course there is this fantastical idea of downloading consciousnesses, which is never fully explained, I think both due to the shortness of the book and also that doesn't really matter in the overall question that the author is trying to get to. But I think it was a fantastic read overall. I gave it a 4-star. I think it was fun. I think it asked a lot of questions. And I think that it poked at something that wasn't so far in the future that it feels completely unbelievable, but that is still fantastical and wondrous to think about, the bringing back an extinct species. And also kind of pokes at questions, once you bring an animal back, how do you have it act like anything remotely close to what it would have acted like when it was still non-extinct? And I think those are all very interesting questions that we can ask and debate and talk about. So overall, I enjoyed the Tusks of Extinction. I'm glad my curiosity prodded me to take this off the library shelf. And if you have read this book or anything like this book, please leave it in the comment section down below. I love receiving your comments. I get a little hit of dopamine when I see my little notification says I received a comment. So please leave some comments and feed my dopamine receptors, please. Thank you so much for watching, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.